Reading and viewing lesson, myths, comprehension skills. Good morning, grade 5s. Today we are going to look at myths, and we're going to start today's lesson off by looking at the different types of folktales. We're then going to move into the characteristics of myths. Before we look at skimming and scanning and the difference between the two, our focus is on scanning as a comprehension method, which is why when you do today's comprehension activity, you're going to notice that the questions are quite easy because you want to use that scanning skill. When you have all done that, there will also be an activity out of your DBE for you to complete. So folktales are traditional tales that are based on the traditions and beliefs of people. They were originally passed down from generation to generation orally, meaning they were spoken. They were told. They weren't written down. It's only in the past 100 years that these tales have been written down and put into books and made widely available. As a result, you'll often find different versions of folktales, especially when it comes to tales such as Little Red Riding Hood. There are 3 or 4 different versions of it. Folktales usually teach a lesson, and we will often call this a moral. And often they use animal characters that represent human qualities or characteristics. There are 5 different types of folktales. The first is myths, and myths is what we're currently looking at. Myths include gods and goddesses, super beings, and heroes. They explain natural events and often include magical creatures. Myths often will teach a lesson, although it generally won't spell it out for you. Legends are based on real people who may have lived long ago. They tell you about these people's heroic deeds or actions. The third type of folktale is a tall tale. Calamity Jane is a type of tall tale. And if you've heard of Calamity Jane, it's because you might have heard of somebody being called, oh, she's a Calamity Jane. But most of us don't actually know that story. And it holds true for a lot of tall tales. If you go and ask somebody to give you an example of a tall tale, most people won't be able to because they are not as popular as the other 4 types of folk tales. Now, tall tales are exaggerated, and the main character needs to solve a problem. Often the main character has superhuman abilities. If they don't, then another character does. And a superhuman ability means that they can do something that a normal human wouldn't be able to do. So they could lift a car with one hand. Humans can't do that. Tall tales are funny. Now, fables are a type of folktale that we've already worked with this year. If you remember last term, we looked at the tortoise and the lizard, which is an African fable. And, of course, in that story, as in with all folktales or all fables, it has animals that act like people. So if you remember from that story, the tortoise was cooking. Tortoises don't cook, but people do. In general, fables have 3 or fewer characters, and they end with a lesson or a moral. Unlike a myth, a fable generally tells you the moral flat out. At the end, it will say the moral of the story is, or it will word it in a different way, but you know that that is the moral. The last type of folktale is a fairy tale. These are the things we grew up with. Cinderella, Beauty and the Beast, Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs. Fairy tales include royalty, and this might be a king, a queen, a prince, a princess, or a combination of these. There are magical elements within the story. So, for example, if you have read Cinderella, in it, a pumpkin gets turned into a carriage. That's magical. They start with once upon a time and end with happily ever after. And in general, your main character, the character that you're rooting for, has a happy ending. A lot of fairy tales come from Europe. So the type of folktale that we're going to be focusing on this term is myths. Myths are stories that try to explain how our world works. They are usually set in a time far in the past, before history as we know it was written. People have always asked questions like, how did our world come to be? Or why is the ocean blue? Some myths seek to answer these questions. So they try to tell us how something in nature came to be, or answer the questions that we've got about how something in nature came to be. In other myths, gods or super beings used their powers to make events happen. These myths describe people and the choices that they made. They might be about victory, tragedy, honor, bravery in the face of fear, or being foolish and making mistakes. Heroes, gods, and goddesses may help them or make things more difficult for them. So myth comes from the Greek word mythos, which means word of mouth. And often, as I said at the beginning, folktales are passed down as oral stories. So examples of mythical creatures or characters include the Greek god Zeus and the Viking god Thor. And there you can already see that not all myths are Greek. Winged horses, unicorns, and other mixed up characters are often found in myths. And if you paid attention during the last couple of slides, you would have seen a few examples of mythical creatures. Now, there are a number of books in popular culture that are based on or include myths. So the story that you read yesterday is a myth that came out of a book called Girl, Boy, Sea by Chris Vick. Now the story itself actually focuses on the 1001 Arabian Tales, but myths have kind of come in at points, and these are made up myths that were written specifically for the book. But Greek myths, Roman myths, Egyptian myths, Hindu myths have all been used in other popular series that are popular amongst kids your age. So the most popular is obviously Percy Jackson, which is based on Greek mythology, and The Lost Hero, which is the follow-up, as part of the follow-up series to Percy Jackson, which introduces Roman mythology. And what's interesting to note is that Greek and Roman mythology often include the same stories, but the gods have been renamed. So they have a Greek name and a Roman name. But the story and what happens is essentially the same. There are a few stories that are completely Greek and a few stories that are completely Roman. And if you've read this series, one of the things you would have noticed is a character of Hercules explains that Hercules is actually the Roman name for the god or the demigod. His actual name is Heracles. But Rick Riordan, who is the writer of the Percy Jackson series, changed the myth or the name of the character, or actually as it's explained, Disney did that. Disney changed it because Hercules sounds better. And that's what a lot of authors and creators of entertainment have done. They have taken these original myths and they've changed elements of the story so that it better suits their audience. Now, Rick Riordan also wrote another series, The Magnus Chase, and that is based on Egyptian mythology. So already we can see that myths come from all over the world. The last series, which has become quite popular amongst kids of 11 to 13 years old, is the Tiger's Curse series. Now, the first 4 books were actually released independently of the 5th book, as it was done by a different publisher, and the tone changed. So most of you probably, if you have read it, or you have friends who have read it, would have only read the first 4. And Tiger's Curse is based on Hindu mythology. Later on in the lesson, when you do your DBE task, you're going to look at sand myths. So, myths come from all over the world. The comprehension skill that I want us to focus on today is scanning. And scanning is often confused with skimming, and although they tie into each other, they are different. Most of you will have come across the word skimming more than scanning in the sense of comprehension. So no, when I say scanning, I'm not asking you to go and take a piece of paper to your scanner and scan it onto your computer. This is different. When I talk about skimming, it is a method of rapid reading, quick reading, reading something quickly. And it helps you to understand the overall theme or general meaning of the text. whereas scanning means looking for a specific piece of information within a text. The purpose of scanning is to locate specific or precise or exact details that a reader is looking for. So the first thing we're going to do is look at skimming. Now, skimming is most popular when you are looking at a non-fiction text. And when you are going to skim, you're going to start by looking at a couple of things. So you're going to look at beginnings and endings. And in grade 5, because our texts are quite short, that would entail reading the first and last paragraph, and more specifically, the first and last sentences of a paragraph. Because if you remember from last term, our creative writing, your first sentence is your topic sentence, and it tells you what the paragraph is about. So it shouldn't be introducing anything new. And this is a perfect place to look, because if you know what is included in that paragraph, you don't necessarily need to go and read it word for word, unless it is relevant to what you need. And that's important. You need to read only the amount of text that is necessary to determine if a section presents a main idea or support for a main idea. You also need to be aware of visual and verbal cues. You need to look for signal words and phrases that indicate an author's direction. For example, however, although, moreover, in addition to. Scanning, on the other hand, requires the reader to look for something particular. And the procedure for scanning is to read each question completely before starting to scan. You're then going to look at that question and choose your keywords. You then go back to the text, and using those keywords, you scan the text to look for answers. When you locate the keyword in the text, you need to read the surrounding text carefully to see if it is relevant to the question that has been asked. And in order to do this, you need to go to step 4, which is to reread the question to determine if the answer you found answers this question. So your keyword might appear in the text more than once, but only on one occasion does the information that surrounds it have any relevance to the question that was asked. And we're going to look at an example now. So if you read yesterday's text, it was 4 pages long. And if you were to scan through that, because you don't have time to read all 4 pages, but you wanted to answer the question, what did the great horseman say after he returned from searching for the jinn? Now we know that the jinn comes up quite often, so to look for that keyword isn't going to be very helpful. However, in that sentence, the keywords great horseman become relevant, and we are going to choose those as our keywords. So when you're doing a comprehension, it is a good idea to look at the question and just to highlight your keyword. So you know that when you go back or go to the text, those are the keywords you are looking for. So you can always read through the questions and highlight for each question. So do 1 to 5 and highlight for each of them, and then go back to the text. Remember to focus on one question at a time, or you can do it question text. It is up to you. You need to do what works for yourself. So anyway, we have chosen great horseman as our keywords. To the text where I've highlighted great horseman, we need to see where we find it. And just by giving a very quick preview, we've got greatest horseman. So the second warrior was the greatest horseman. Remember, we now need to look at the text that surrounds it. He believed he could ride fast and cut the legs of the jinn, so he would fall like a tree. What did the great horseman say after he returned from searching for the jinn? We can see that this doesn't tell us anything about him returning. It tells us how he would defeat it. So we need to continue scanning it and see if we can find those keywords again. And great, we have. The great horseman wailed, "I shall never ride a horse or swing a sword again." So he said that. So we know that this is what has been said. Well, he wailed it, but that is a thing of saying or doing it. But do we know that it is after returning from searching for the jinn? No. So we need to go back in the text to the previous paragraph. But he too came home. Okay. So that it is what we're looking for, because he came home, he returned. So this paragraph here, paragraph 25, is a paragraph where we need to use the information to give our answer. So what did the great horseman say after he returned from searching for the jinn? The great horseman said, I shall never ride a horse or swing a sword again, when he returned from searching for the jinn. I hope that you now understand what scanning is and that you are able to tell the difference between the different types of folktales. This will prove relevant in today's online activity, which can be accessed at the link that is provided on your screen now. You are going to complete this form online. Choose your answers. It will mark it for you. Just so you are aware, the last question on the slide, if your answer is not worded exactly like the answer I have given, it is not going to mark it. Please don't think that your answer is wrong. It is impossible for me to give every variation of the wording of that answer so that you can get it correct. It won't mark it automatically. I will go back and check it later on in the week. After you've done that, you then need to complete the DBE pages for today, which is page 120 and page 121. I hope that you have a great day and that tomorrow you are ready for our last English lesson for the week.